All right, nice. I don't really do intros on the podcast. I just like start kind of chatting and then just get straight into it. I like to imagine people there just working and just like, you know how you turn on music and it's just like right there for you? It's a bit like that.
There's not enough podcasts in my field, I feel like. When I'm at the gym, I like podcasts.
Oh, really?
And that's what I would love to have, some sort of podcast to listen to in my particular field.
Are you all right, like kind of sharing any podcasts you like listening to, or is that more of a private
No,
thing?
I'm pretty new to the podcast space in a sense, so I just sort of just randomly pick whatever's on the BBC at the time, really.
Oh, interesting. All right. So I'm sure most people already know who you are. You are Grant Abbitt. Do you want to give like a little introduction generally, just in case anyone's coming over from other fields? Because I think we have like some people from other tech spaces that might not know.
I'm mainly a YouTuber, 3D artist. I like to call myself. I use Blender for 3D art and creation, and Premiere as well for animations and stuff. And but YouTuber seems to be my main role, and teacher I suppose is YouTuber teacher, I would say.
Yeah, that's interesting because you actually came over from being a teacher, didn't you? I think.
That's right. Yeah. So I was a games design teacher. Well, in fact, I started as an IT teacher, which is amazing because my technical skills are pretty lacking. I started as an ICT teacher and then went into media studies, which was actually my field. I like media studies, so it's more film related and that sort of thing, and television. And then went back into games design because I had those Blender skills and I was doing a bit of visual effects and enjoying playing around with Blender. Back into sort of games design. And that started me on the YouTube journey of creating YouTube videos. And I thought, oh, this is great. And then slowly the income from that kind of took over from the teaching. And it was enough to go away from teaching and in full time into YouTube. And YouTube's wonderful, isn't it? Because you suddenly see what teaching could be in a sense that you can reach so many people. And have that sort of influence is quite special, I feel like.
Yeah, it is interesting. It's very hard to visualize. Like, I'm sure every now and again you might have looked at like your audience, like geography, and it's just like it's so international. It's very strange. It's like hard to kind of imagine someone sitting there like on a little table, you know, like in a third world country.
Yes.
Do you know what's also really weird? Like after the Ukraine war started, I was like, I wonder if anyone's still watching the videos from Ukraine, and there are people still watching them, which is, you know, nice.
Amazing.
Crazy. But it's funny to hear about you being a teacher first and then like the income from all this stuff taking over. That's a story I really like hearing because you hear that from other creators as well. But did you have like any students that kind of knew about the YouTube channel as you were doing it? Like,
yeah, because my YouTube channel was very much to aid my teaching. So I would introduce people to my YouTube. And at the first, it was sort of like, oh, he's trying to get subscribers sort of thing. And that was not my goal. But the subscriber base grew probably because I had teaching skills. And so, you know, when you go onto YouTube, they're experts, but they don't really know how to communicate with a beginner because they've forgotten what it's like in a way. But because I was in the classroom all the time, seeing the mistakes that students were making, I was able to put that into my YouTube videos and be very precise about steps and things. So the YouTube videos grew, and strangely, people actually, which was a surprise to me, I actually got recognized without someone purposely going onto my YouTube video or knowing about it. They sort of
really?
that was a real shock to me. It's because obviously they're in the Blender space. They love games design, wanted to study games design, and then they came specifically to my school because they saw me on YouTube sort of thing. It's like, oh, that's Grant Abbitt sort of thing.
Oh, really?
And that was quite a special moment.
Yeah, that's interesting.
You feel slightly famous.
Have you ever, like, I mean, it's probably not that easy for people in our community, but have you been recognized out in public ever? Or,
no. No. Only that in terms of sort of specifically towards game design. So it's sort of, it doesn't feel like out in public. Very, very, there's sort of a link there. So that never without that sort of link. In a way.
I've always said like, it's like famous, community famous. That's
community famous.
Yeah, interesting. So yeah, the ability to kind of have the content expand and hit new audiences is always weird, and it's always very kind of difficult to wrap your head around. Do you find yourself ever battling with imposter syndrome? Like, because this is something I do struggle with, but it comes in waves.
Yeah, definitely.
So like, what's your take?
Yeah, I still feel like a massive imposter in the Blender space because, well, there's people such as yourself who have really huge knowledge and understanding of the intricacies of the program, and there's me just playing with a tablet, sketching. I'm just, I always, and people ask me questions on YouTube sometimes, which are really like, I have no idea what the question is even asking, yeah, let alone why they would think that I would know this. So yeah, but I suppose people have their specialities, but even in the art space, I know there's so many artists that are much better than I am. And so I feel bad that people are coming to watch my YouTube sometimes, because you should be going and seeing this more unknown artist out here, but because I've got a larger subscriber base, then people recognize and see mine more. So I feel I am an imposter. It's not a syndrome.
Yeah.
I'm just this big imposter.
I recognize that feeling, but when you think about other industries as well, this isn't like an unusual thing, I suppose, because when you think about like science communicators, you know, you imagine like Brian Cox and people like that on TV. They do have skills. There's like a whole like science industry, but that's not really the point, is it? Because like Brian has like the communicator skills, and that's like
very true.
That's how the information kind of gets out to people.
I like that analogy. That's very helpful to me, actually.
I think I've always kind of imagined it. Well, the way I've described it is that tutorial creators create patterns from noise. So if you imagine if you look at software like Blender, all of the potential for what you can make, all the different styles, all the different skills you have, everything you could possibly make is just white noise to like a lot of people. And it's very difficult to navigate white noise. You know, it's just a mess.
Yes.
And I've always thought it's the job of like tutorial creators or communicators to kind of find a pattern to show people, oh, this is a route you can take through the noise, you know?
Yes.
So that's how I try and think about it. Like that is a skill. And kind of actually going back to something we spoke about before the podcast, like about the whole AI thing, that I think, and the course stuff, that having these kind of curated paths to let people navigate those skill sets is something that I think is an important like human like skill, human connection. So
I agree.
Yeah, these are the things I tell myself when I start feeling like an imposter.
Yeah, that's. I think that is a very good way of looking at it, and that's actually making me feel slightly better about being an imposter.
All right, good. You should also stop calling yourself an imposter. I bet there are lots of people that want to give you a slap.
It's one of those British things as well, isn't it? Sort of self-denigration, and you just sort of put yourself down so you don't put yourself out there to get smacked down. So you just put yourself down before anybody else does.
Speaking of which, like I scroll through my Instagram reels every morning because I'm a degenerate, and I like there are some British ones that pop up, and it's just someone opening a door and they just can't get through each other. Sorry.
Yeah,
they just feel like that's exactly that's the whole thing. But
I like that. I like being like that. I feel it's important to stay humble with everything you do. And it stops you then judging people. And there's lots of toxicity out there, isn't it, on the internet especially. And so I'm just this down here, so no one can get toxic and you're not affected by it in a sense, because you just think, well, who am I anyway? It doesn't matter.
Yeah, I find that like if you've got like a creative personality, it's kind of easy to fluctuate in mood a bit, especially if you've got like other things going on, if you're like ADD or bipolar or whatever. And there's quite a lot of neurodivergence in the community. But Indeed. What I find is that if you have like a kind of set of mental principles for like, why are you doing this work? Like, you know, what do you want to share? These are kind of like good guidelines to help you stay a bit grounded. So on the days like where you feel like an imposter, or maybe on days you might feel overconfident, it's like you kind of come back to a baseline. It's like, oh, this is why I'm doing it at the end of the day. So
I like that. This is interesting to me. These being on a podcast like this, I see so many sort of those. What's his name? The big podcast guy who's
Joe Rogan is like the
Joe Rogan. That's it. But I find those podcasts are a bit. I don't know. There's something about them that doesn't hit home. But you've got. I think you are a great podcaster, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Because you're asking the right. But you keep coming up with these nuggets of cleverness that I'm thinking. Oh wow, this. I should. I'm going to promote your podcast from now on and say this is the one to listen to because he's got some skills. This man.
Oh, that's good. I like that. This is another reason why I don't like over planning things. I've literally got about 4 lines on your notes here for things to speak about because I like the improvisation skill. because it's kind of just like you work through, like, again, it's like noise, it's patterns in noise. Like you give yourself a little bit of noise and then you try and find a pattern. So I feel like it's a kind of like a good skill to exercise, like with the improv discussion, trying to like find nuggets, etc. But actually, that kind of makes you think about something else. I'm terrified of the idea of doing live art, like on YouTube. I think you've done live streams before, because I've jumped into some, like in the chats.
Yeah.
Is this something you're afraid of doing, or is this something you enjoy doing? Have you been doing it recently? Is it like something you want to do more?
That's a really interesting one. Now, I stopped doing them because I think I must have got COVID, basically, and I didn't know. And that I got these weird breathing problems.
Yes.
And the slight elevated stress of it must have just triggered. And I started on stream, on one of my last streams, I think it was. I just couldn't catch my breath. And I was sort of, this is really odd, this is. And after that, I just felt that like it was just that little bit too much pressure to keep going with. It's something I might return to, because I did enjoy that community aspect of chatting people and things. But there was a stress to it that was difficult to difficult, and it's difficult to justify as well, because I don't think it was boosting my channel that much. It was more just me having a bit of fun. So I thought, actually, I can step back from that and maybe revisit it at some point.
Yeah, it's interesting hearing you say about why you stopped doing it, because I think that might be a bit similar. I did a few streams, and then I think it was around the COVID time that I just stopped doing it, because I remember actually speaking to you, because I had like these sensory breathing problems as well. I'm not sure if it was for the same reason. I found out that for me, this might sound a bit weird, because I went through like a whole endoscopy. They took like biopsies. We had like x-rays, like everything looked fine. But I noticed that on days where I had anything with cream in it, or butter, or full fat milks, it's not lactose intolerance. But if I had something with that in the morning, and then something irritating in the evening, like vinegar, mint, wine, whatever, complete sensory like shutdown for the breathing issues. And it took ages to figure out it was these two things. And like a lot of people will listen to that and go, that doesn't make any sense. But like after testing, so much testing, it's every single time. And it's still a problem, but not so much of a problem. Back then, at the same time, it was massively intense. Like in the middle of the day, you just start feeling weird for no reason. Like you couldn't breathe. I think like my nose would start tingling, because you're kind of subconsciously hyperventilating, because you're actually getting more oxygen than you need, because you're not really feeling like the breath. So yeah, interesting
stuff. Yeah, I've had loads of. I have a weird diet, and because of allergy issues, but I've never really been able to get to the bottom of it. And I think it's because it's a combination of two different things that makes it exponentially harder to find what's triggering it. It's not just this one thing, but that one thing and that one thing. And I'm sure it's that's what's going on. And it's really, I still haven't got to the bottom of it, to be honest.
Yeah, I've been like practicing these kind of like medical elimination tactics. If you watch like my recent video about the health problems, like my balance things, it's again like this combination factor stuff going on. But it's really interesting, because if you think about the problems like you're debugging a program, then you can get to the solution faster.
It's exactly that, yeah.
It's like, you know those games where, is it like Wordle or something, where you come up with a word and then you go another one, and it tells you which ones are in the right place or which ones are right. It's kind of like doing that, but for your medical symptoms. So if you've got like a diet, like, till you find. But anyway, I hope maybe one day you do find out like the reasons for your allergies, or what's causing them, or all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I've sort of gone down to this very, very strict diet. And then I just that stabilized me, and I just sort of stick to that, and then I just try things out every now and again. So it's sort of like take everything out approach. I suppose there's probably a name for that in programming as well. Go back to right at the beginning. It's strange though, isn't it, how our lives can compare to how we build computer programs and so forth.
Exactly.
I often say that my life, I like to think of my life like a computer game, and leveling up. Or role-playing games where you try and increase your stats in certain areas and stuff to get the best character. That's exactly how I live my life.
Yeah, I think that as well. Like in terms of achievements, like with like the 100,000 sub thing, I just imagine like a little Steam pop up saying achievement unlocked, and that's like, yeah.
Yes.
But also, when you're looking at your general stats, like the money, the views, subs, etc., that can be quite demotivating sometimes. But if you think about it a bit like a video game, I think sometimes it makes it seem a bit less like there's an extra separation there. I don't know if you've ever played games like Factorio, like logistics and automation games.
No.
Okay,
I know of them, but not played them.
So this is interesting. They're basically games you make like little conveyor belts, and then you get like these resources, and then you put them into assemblers, and they make new products, and then you combine products to make more complex things and stuff like that. And one thing I found is interesting is that I think they like align so much with the content production skills. Like when you're playing those games, you're kind of enabling like the same parts of your brain that you're using when you're making content. You're basically like, okay, well, here's my factory process for making something. How can we speed that up? Like here's how you do it elsewhere. So I think actually like game theory is quite applicable for like the content production space.
Yeah. I suppose it does mimic life in many ways, doesn't it? So, that's why we play games in a way, to sort of have a slimmed down version of someone else's life sort of scenario.
Yeah, speaking of which, are you much of a gamer? Because I'm pretty sure I've seen you play games before. You've played Divinity. I remember kind of watching you play that. No, not watching you, but seeing you play it.
Seeing that, on Discord that I play it, so that I think that's the last time I played a game, although I occasionally try and get into a game, but for some reason, I feel like I've almost outgrown them. And it might be a life stress management scenario that I can't unwind very easily with the game anymore because I feel like I've got too many other things to do. And I'm probably not in a very good place in that sense. But not that I'm, having difficulties or anything, but I just feel like I'm a little bit overloaded with work that I can't get back into the gaming space because of games, generally speaking, these days, they take a little bit of time to get into because you have to learn the lore of the game, as it were. And some of them are quite tough these days. And I'll just quickly give up because I just really need the casual game. And there's a fear as well of taking on a game that the addictive nature of it that I don't want to, because I used to love RPGs, the single player RPG, walking through these worlds in open worlds. Witcher 3 was my favourite. But it does take up a lot of your life if you're just plodding along, killing monsters and so forth. But it's great fun. So it's hard to get a balance sometimes. So there's always a nervousness of getting into the games, but also the time it takes to get into the game as well. So. But if I do want to play the God of War games. They look exciting. So that's
the art styles for the latest two is really impressive.
Yep. So that's what I would like to do. Usually I wait till I'm ill and I can't do anything else. And a game is a good way of getting over an illness, and for me.
That's quite an interesting way of thinking about it. I kind of go in phases. I do play games quite a lot. I usually do it in the evenings. It's kind of like, I don't know if you get this feeling, but sometimes, actually, I don't know how you structure your day, because I like don't have set times. I just work like all the time. I usually more productive in the mornings, and then it slows down like by the evenings. But there comes a point in the day when my brain goes, I can't do it. I can't do it anymore. And then that's when I turn on a game. And then it's basically, it kind of gives me the same feeling as like reading a book before bed or something. You're just kind of like doing this thing. It's phasing your mind out. And then that's like sends you to sleep, so that's kind of really how I treat games now. But you still enjoy them, but I think they kind of become more of like a routine tool, I think, just for like kind of calming you down, taking your mind off the work. It's, I guess, like a form of meditation or something. But
that's very true. And that's probably how I would, if I were to get back into gaming, that's the prime time for me would be sort of in the evening, chilling out, and go on a game or something. I would like to do some cooperative games and things, but I've never really got into that space. There's always a slight nervousness because they're usually first-person shooters and really frantic, and that's sort of a bit too much for me. I'm an old man now. Can't handle jumping into those spaces.
Oh, I was going to say I love cooperative games. I used to play them a lot with like old friend groups, but I don't really have those friend groups anymore. I think just because like life naturally diverges, and we have like
Yeah.
such different types of work and different personalities. So it's quite like a lonely experience now gaming, like only solo games, because it feels like, again, if this is like your kind of meditation at the end of the day, it's kind of a personal thing. And so yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, at the risk of us sounding again like old men, but there is that sort of you do kind of move on in life, and you lose those friend groups to a degree, don't you? Because of it's not because you fall out; it's just circumstance pushes you in different directions. And in fact, for me, married life, I don't have as much time to play games. I feel like I should be spending that with my wife rather than with the screen. But it's still, it's still tempting to go onto games and things.
Yeah.
But yeah.
No, I hope we don't depress any viewers, because I was in a call with my some of my Discord friends yesterday. I think it was yesterday. I have such a bad sense of time now. Who we actually met at the Blender conference, because this was another fascinating thing. Because a lot of the people in our Discord server are kind of in Europe. When the Blender conference happened, it was like the first time we could all meet at this congregation spot, because Amsterdam's pretty central. So that was handy. But I was speaking to some of them and kind of just like reminiscing about the Discord over the last 4 years. Like, the first conversations we had. Oh, do you remember this person, this person, this person? And it had like a bit of a sad tinge to it. But again, the thing is, as you're saying, like everyone's life variables and environment are so different that you just kind of gravitate in different ways, and that's fine.
Yeah, and the reminisce is good, but there's also the new adventures, and we to be more positive, we do. There's loads of new adventures and exciting things to happen as well. It's just different friendship groups, sort of thing, isn't it? So and sometimes you're between those groups. So on a positive note, it's still exciting times to move on to these new adventures. And that's again, it's like a computer game, isn't it? It's
exactly.
The new pathways, new adventures. Your character's taking on the expansion pack.
Yes, new quests.
New quest, exactly that.
There's a saying I have, which I keep drilling this into my friend Ben, Cartesian Caramel. We had him on for an episode. I keep drilling into his head, which is my second policy for life, which is you don't know what you don't know. And what it means is you can't visualize what you haven't experienced. You don't know the people you haven't spoken to yet. Obviously, like, it's very easy to get stuck in your own world, like when you're feeling kind of disappointed, depressed about things, upset, but you have no idea what potential people you could meet, what things are just around the corner, what feelings you could feel, etc. So it's like an important thing to keep in mind. So yeah, if you're feeling bad about something, just remember you don't know what you don't know. Like, future you could be having a really good time.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, so, and you don't know what you don't know is an important aspect, because we were talking just before this, weren't we, about AI and the progression of AI, and how there's concerns, but there's excitement as well, and and I was concerned maybe that I would lose my position as someone who can be a teacher, because AI will do it all. But if you don't even know the questions to ask AI, there's something to be said for that sort of interaction, isn't there? So you find out what you need to know, which you don't know at the moment.
On that subject, it's kind of interesting, because I've been thinking about it a lot recently, doing like AI tests. I've been building like an automation network with AI. Again, this is something you probably haven't seen on my second channel, but I built like a little worker bot thing where different computers will have like this connected hive mind, and you can give them different roles. And it really makes me think about like, okay, it's becoming increasingly easy to automate content. But now that we're kind of exploring this mentally, what parts of a content creation process should you automate, and which ones should you leave human? So now I think a lot of people are kind of like having this kind of like conceptual discussion now. I've kind of come to the decision that everything in front of the camera needs to be human. Like the value is really in this human connection, like this kind of process, this communication, etc. Everything else behind the scenes, file management, trimming things down, whatever, like there's no value to a human connection in that. So that's kind of like my approach. And as I said to you, like before the podcast as well, that I'm not that worried about like YouTubers' jobs being taken away, because I feel like there's always going to be a value in a human connection. Like people always look for authenticity in every market ever that's like kind of had the manufacturing processes speed things up. There's always like an offshoot like section of more expensive versions of things, which people want to pay more for, either to flex or because they want to feel something. And what is that thing they want to feel? It's just like this connection to ye olden times.
Yeah, that's
like,
true though, isn't it? It
yeah.
is true. And it's the same, I suppose, with most technologies, isn't it? That the previous technology doesn't always die. Like stop motion, we still have stop motion animation because there's something about it that's quite exciting, interesting, and that personal time and energy that's been put into that. You don't seem to get the same effects from CGI. It's still amazing CGI, but we haven't lost it, that art. And I think that's a good thing. And there is an authenticity to it. And also on the YouTube front, in fact, one of my guilty pleasures is TikTok. I do enjoy TikTok, getting
nice.
snippets of information and scrolling through that. That's my way of switching off in the evening, is actually to go on TikTok. But I'm noticing there's loads of AI content springing up, which is this AI character whose lips are moving a bit weirdly, and it's sort of information based. And you just think, and the information's even slightly weird. You think that doesn't really flow. And you think, so someone is just automating all these videos, and that's the sort of content we're going to see more of. It will get better, but you can tell pretty fast that this is automated, and there is no connection there at all. It's no, and you just feel like it's people trying to jump on the bandwagon, as it were, make some money out of this space. And I think there'll be a real need for people to get by that, and they'll get sick of it very quickly, I feel like.
Yeah, I wonder. I have a little prediction that if regular personalities leave the platform in the future or get overtaken by this kind of like AI space thing, I think the desire for old personalities will increase over time, because I think people will kind of like have this nostalgia. It's really interesting looking at other markets. If you imagine like the vinyl record market, it's outsold CDs now.
Yeah, that's weird.
Year. So it's again, it's kind of nostalgia, but it's fun. There's something fun and engaging about it. And for people that used to sell vinyls, they probably they might have gone out of business if they didn't adapt, and they might be looking at the market now going, what? Why?
Yes.
Where were you now? Maybe they've gone back into it, but it's like you can't really think about relying on that, because maybe it's just a fad and people will get over it. But I don't think it is. I think people are kind of rediscovering this value in the quality of the sound. It's just different. It's enjoyable. We've got a new vinyl. I've been collecting a few as well. And you kind of imagine the size of the audience for that maybe it's just a quick fad and then it shrinks. But I think in a lot of cases, for life in general, for industries, it's more the case that the pie is just always growing. And I think that's really true for Blender. And I remember speaking to some other add-on developers who were surprised by how their sales were so consistent over the years. Particularly hard surface add-ons, and the reason is because they kind of expect that there is some sales and then it dies off. But because Blender is growing, the size of the pie is just growing overall. The industries are growing. It's just everything. So I think that even if things automate certain processes, and even if industries kind of die out, I think there are always going to be these new offshoot opportunities, even if they're kind of reminiscent of old ones, like the vinyl records, etc. So I wouldn't be too worried if you feel like you have an adaptable skill set.
This is what you were saying beforehand, before our conversation here, weren't you? About we're encouraged to go down a specialised, but really actually now it's more, you should be generalising. Expand on that for the audience who didn't hear that.
It kind of feels like a sick joke when you look back at it, because I really struggled to get any job because I was so generalized and chaotic and just interested in everything. But when you're applying for certain large production companies, whatever, visual effects houses, they kind of filter people out. I don't know if you've ever applied for a visual effects company, but there's a proper form you fill out. It's not like you just send in a letter. That's part of it. But there's this process because it's automated. There are so many people. And it kind of always feels like you're really encouraged to be an expert or have a very specific path, into doing a skill set, into doing a job, and not to generalize. So you are a focused part of this pipeline. That's what you do. Yeah. And maybe in the past that looked bulletproof. And that, yes, I have these expertise, these skills. I'm difficult to replace because there aren't many of us that have spent all this time specializing. But again, rule number 2, you don't know what you don't know, says that any tool could appear out of nowhere and just knock you off the board. And now you have no generalized skills. or you haven't learned to adapt to different technology. So
Yeah.
it's this weird thing where if you wanted like job security back in the day, and there are always exceptions to all of this. Rule number one, all things within reason. Sorry. There are always exceptions. So it seems like back in the day, you're kind of encouraged to be a specialist. But now, because like the unpredictability of the space with all the AI tools kind of knocking things out, it seems like it's a smarter idea to be a generalist. So now you're kind of more adaptive. And I think that goes hand in hand with the fact that more and more people aren't doing just one job for their whole life nowadays. I think the case in point is someone like you. Exactly, because you were a teacher and now you're doing this. There are elements which connect those things together, but I guess because you've had this kind of adaptive mindset, you might not have even realized, but you're kind of just flown into a more appropriate position.
Very much so. Yep. Yeah, that adaptability I think is key in today's landscape, and that both adaptability and willingness to be adaptable. They are slightly two different things.
Yeah.
Because some people like to, I just want to focus on this because I find that everything else too much noise. But the willingness to let's explore and find out what's out there.
It's interesting.
It's crucial.
I can't remember what it's called. There's a certain like personality test which I find interesting, which it's not like an objective one. It's based on like averages. And they've got a bunch of like different categories like neuroticism or conscientiousness and openness to experience and whatever. And creative people always rank high in openness to experience. And I feel like there's a correlation there between being open to experiences and being willing to adapt in your line of work. So that's probably a reason why a lot of creative people gravitate towards content creation, which doesn't necessarily need to be true. Because when you think about like education space, number file, like all these kind of like code based things or study channels which do really well, it doesn't necessarily feel like it needs to be just creative people. But I feel like because that's a factor, like a personality factor that's consistent, you see a lot of creative people gravitating to these spaces, and I think we have an advantage there going forward. But it's just interesting to think about. Obviously, I know that a lot of people have concerns about all the AI stuff, but I'm not too worried about it.
The thing that worries me, and I can't remember who the quote was, begins with an A, but it was people often overestimate new technologies in the short term and underestimate them in the long term.
Yeah.
I can't remember who that is. And I feel like, yes, we're okay for, let's say maybe even 5 years. And then there's going to be that sort of gradual shift where it will suddenly take away loads of people's jobs. And I feel like that's a societal shift that we're not ready for.
Yeah.
And often this is talked about, particularly in the art spaces at the moment, because they're seeing the real results of Mid-Journey and Stable Diffusion and stuff. And there's a lot of fear there and a lot of anger as well. Them stealing, AI stealing their work and stuff, which I don't know, maybe we'll go into later. But that's a microcosm of what's going to happen everywhere else, and we probably are starting to see some of those jobs, or maybe people not wanting to go into that industry. It will affect that industry in a big way. But like I say, that's going to be, I don't know how much you want to talk about this, but I think about this a lot, that society is going to have to change. At the moment, we've got this we've still got quite a class structure of, you've got this rich people and poor people, and it has the potential to just do this.
Yeah.
But it also has the potential to do this, and that's what's really, I'm more scared of that for society's sake, and what it might. And we're already seeing that, COVID and the pandemic kind of caused this, didn't it? With rich people getting richer, poor people getting much poorer. And we're certainly seeing it in our country, the UK, the poorer are getting a lot poorer because of energy costs and things. And these rich people taking all the money. I could go on for hours, but I won't do. But that's my fear, that AI is going to, it has the potential to level it out and be a leveler that will make everybody not have to go out and work for hours and hours. We could have a 2-day week, and people could have all this free time. But in reality, I'm worried that it's going to do this, and these rich people are just going to have wealth beyond. Well, we've already got rich people who have wealth beyond measure.
Yeah.
That's this future that I'm worried about. Do you ever think about this sort of 5, maybe 10 years in the future, this...
I try not to think too far in advance.
Not to get too depressing.
Yeah, because as we said, rule 2, you don't know what you don't know. All, like, it's impossible to predict. And if anyone did have the power to predict, then they also have the power to exploit. So it's kind of like you don't really want anyone to know what's going to happen. Optimistically, I like to think that it would try and level the playing field, but realistically, it will level the playing field in some places and separate it in other places. And you just hope that life overall, the quality of life, is improved.
Yes,
but it might not be. But it might not be, and it may be the case that, again, maybe that happens more in some countries, and therefore people migrate more, and then there's all this kind of all these other socio-political factors that come into it, and then that drives like certain legislation to control certain AI tools based on factors that really aren't as important as other factors. And this kind of goes back to like another conversation on this podcast I had with Ben, saying that there's a stigma around like the development of all these new tools, because when we see them applied to certain use cases like artwork, AI art, we grow a stigma around the tool based on that specific use case. But the underlying technique can be applied to any industry. You can find an application for it, especially for like the AI like ChatGPT tools. Because realistically, they're just like pattern recognition, interpretation machines, whatever. They can replace a bunch of algorithms. But because you see them in the AI art space, like we're talking generally about AI tools, you kind of drive your entire perspective based on that. And especially if you've been affected by it, it's like an emotional reaction. You might not be thinking about how that can apply to cancer research, for example.
That's right.
So if legislation is based on emotional experiences, then you may be causing a net negative effect elsewhere. So
quite right.
That's
Very
something really difficult to navigate. But it kind of feels like education's a problem there. Because I think this is where there's the benefit of seeing things from the programmer perspective again. Because if you understand the foundation, like tech, and try and forget like all this colorful, we've given names to all these tools and this is what it's doing to ruin your life, then you can see, actually this can be applied elsewhere. But it kind of goes back to like the nuclear or atomic, like it gives us a lot of power, but it can also destroy cities. So
Indeed. Yeah. That's interesting. I see it that way myself, because as an artist in the AI, in the 3D world, I suppose I'm mainly a teacher, but I would see myself as try and see myself as an artist.
You are. What is this negative talk? Like, I'm impressed. I will just say before you carry on, I'm impressed with how prolific you are as an artist. Like, I look on your YouTube channel with all the thumbnails. I'm impressed with the amount you do, because I actively try and avoid modeling now. So when I see other people doing it, I'm like, yeah, it's good on them. Sorry for interrupting.
No, that's great. I appreciate that. It's always helpful to get some positivity. But yeah, so I'm having lots of fun with this art creation, but AI sort of got me worried, because I see someone made in 5 seconds what would take me 5 days, and I think, that's a little bit, well, maybe not quite 5 days, but it's a bit scary to see that. But then it starts me thinking, actually, let's go back to why I first got into games design, or in fact, I was more into the film making and visual effects, and but it's partly game design as well. And when I first started playing games or watching films, I used to think, wouldn't it be great if they did this instead? And I think that's what sparked my interest. Well, maybe I can make my own game or own film. And that was my original goals, was to make a game or film. But the reality is you have to specialize. You can't make a game or film by yourself very easily without absolutely loads of resources, especially back when I was first getting into it. But now we're starting to see that maybe you could. And maybe in 5 years' time, you can start saying, right, I want this character to do this and this character to do this, and help me come up with an idea of where this character could go. And it could be very, very creative. And that's what I would have wanted back then. So I've changed because my life has gone directly into this sort of 3D artist role. I'm sort of starting to get worried about my 3D artist role. But actually what I wanted to do originally was make games and films. So why am I not saying, yes, this technology is great, let's go back to that. And psychologically, it's quite hard to make this jump of, but what about all these art skills I've built up? they're still massively useful because I can decide what sort of art I want to see based on my knowledge. So that's what I'm trying to be positive about this, the opportunities to go back to Grant as a kid and the excitement of creating those things without the boundaries of you haven't got a fast enough computer, you haven't got the skill, is very, very exciting. But it's still very daunting as well.
Yeah, it's interesting thinking about that because I kind of probably the same way, like lost sight, I think, because the way I got into YouTube was unexpected. It was like I wanted to get into, again, visual effects or games because I didn't really have a plan. I actually really wanted to do games. I told you that I put a game out on Steam. The bad time of my life, but like you learn a lot. And then I did this alternate reality game called Entropy, which is basically, do you know what an alternate reality game is? An ARG, as they call it?
No.
It's like a game that happens in real life. So you basically lay like a trail of puzzles for people to complete. They can go
I know what you mean now, yeah.
From like website to website. And I basically did like this YouTube series. And it was really engaging. And something I discovered in that is that I love giving people emotional experiences through something interactive. That's like the core of it. So there was so much fun in that. I was like, right, you need to do more music video type things, more animated type. Yes, let's do something creative. But I'm not an animator, and I hate that. So thinking, like, if animation accessible tools, like for people with like my attention span, were available back then, would the path have been different? Because now I've gone into like the more educational, like tool design space. And ultimately, when I do like the tool development, I'm thinking, well, the version of me idealistically that would be doing exactly what he wanted, what tools would he like? But because I still don't know much about animation, I'm not building animation tools. But like, yeah, what you're saying about like these tools can be exciting because now they can allow people to do things. It's getting me thinking again, like, okay, well, actually, is it possible to get slightly more back onto that route, like where you were originally hoping to? And again, like I imagine there are a lot of people thinking that about video games and films, etc. So yeah, it's nice having that kind of optimistic take on it. The other side of it is maybe the word would be oversaturation. Like, imagine a music artist. There are so many kids that want to grow up and do music now, but realistically, if everyone can do it, then like discoverability is a problem. But then again, going back to the pie idea, the pie is always growing. Maybe it's possible for more people to make a living, even if it's oversaturated. Yeah.
And my hope is that making a living is not the main goal anymore. It's actually enjoying and having an experience. That's a career. And that's the ideal in life in a way. A career shouldn't be about surviving. It should be about sort of growing as a person and doing something special. That's my real hope for AI, is that it will level everything out that we don't need to survive by having a job. We can actually have a job that really fulfills us, and that's the utopia that I see. Hopefully, please.
Thriving, not surviving. That's like
indeed. That's exactly it, isn't it? Yeah. You touched on these rules you have. I want to go back to that. You said number one rule. What are these rules that you have? They sound very interesting to me.
Give me 1 second. I'll bring out my my policy list. I found that, again, okay, so not very modest to say. I consider myself quite creative, but I feel like it's a curse as well as a gift. Like, it's not something to brag about because it's extremely difficult to focus on things. And I'm pretty sure I have ADD as well, but I'm not too sure, right? Because it's either hyper-focusing on something extremely technical and finding that effortless, or watching a video without doodling is just like an impossible task. So anyway, what I'm getting at is that when you're feeling chaotic, as you often do, policies help to ground you. So I write things down. All things within reason is rule number 1. And what that means is there's no such thing as anything black or white. Like, there's always going to be gray.
Quite right.
But the policy is all things within reason because logically that makes sense. The term nothing is ever black or white is an absolute statement, so it contradicts itself. So all things within reason is also rule number 1 because it modifies every following rule. It means that every policy we're about to say has exceptions. So that's why all things within reason is number 1. So Yeah, rule number 2 is you don't know what you don't know, what we spoke about, meaning that
Yep.
you may feel confident about something forever, but you're always going to be wrong. Be open to be wrong about things. You never know what's around the corner, etc. There's don't take criticism from anyone you wouldn't take advice from. So this is
I like that one.
This is a quick measure when you're reading hate comments.
Yep.
It's hard to know who to listen to and who not to. Realistically, listen to only a very few people. And the way you discover that is to ask yourself, would you take advice from this person? Even if they're a professional in a field, the answer is not always yes, because they might be professional in something that's not what you're doing, you know? So, important to keep in mind.
Because professionals aren't always actually good at giving advice, which is quite weird as well. Sometimes you hear the advice and you think that was actually really bad advice, but they were so good at what they did, but they just, they can't give advice, but they're very good at what they do.
It's kind of coming back to that, maybe it's not a good idea specializing always, being a generalist. So, because when you're getting advice from someone that's been really good at something, maybe that's appropriate, maybe that's what you want, maybe that's going to help you, but sometimes that's coming from like a closed off box, like this compartmentalized experience that got them there. So yeah, sometimes it's difficult to know. Rule number 4 is kind of a new one, more of an emotional one that just says live your truth. And what it means is don't hide away waiting for a perfect moment to do something. There's no perfect moment. Transitionary periods between where you are now and where you want to be are still a part of your life. It's very easy to block things out. And I've been feeling that recently because we've been waiting for months to like move to this new area. And I've always been telling myself, oh, wait until then before you do something. But realizing that this is still my life. So, that kind of thing.
That's a good one.
I won't say all of them because there's like 20 policies, but maybe a couple more.
Yeah, definitely. I'm very interested.
There's don't sabotage yourself because there are already enough people that will try and do it for you.
Very true. Very true.
You don't want to be another person that's trying to shut you down. And that's, again, going to the hate comments and like all that kind of thing. Yeah. Some people just don't like seeing other people succeeding or just being themselves, right? So you don't want to be another factor in that. If you're dealing with like self-sabotage, imposter syndrome, you're kind of balancing on a knife edge, I feel like, where sometimes you're feeling confident enough to make something, but someone saying the wrong thing could push you the other way. So this is just saying try and lean a bit closer on your end because there are already people that want to push you like the other side.
Yes.
And there's explore untrodden paths and be open to experience. That's kind of like the second one, but saying more just maybe give it a try. Like try and get out of your comfort zone.
It's hard, that, isn't it? Because there is a comfort zone, and if you're in it, it's like being in a warm, cozy place, and there's really cold outside. But then there might be something cool outside as well. It is hard to make that move a lot of the time, isn't it?
I think what I'm doing now is an example of me exercising that because I was kind of closed off for a few months, like dealing with stuff and not really being social. And this is kind of like an attempt to get back out there. And the last one I'll say is keep one foot on the ground. So that one is what I call the anti-cult rule. But what I mean by that is it's easy to get obsessed with something and like believe something or change your entire life direction based on like an emotion or one thing you've experienced. But keep one foot on the ground means that you should always, it's like leaving a trail out in a forest at night, have a way to find your way back to like where you started, just in case things don't go well. So that's where I'll leave it. Maybe I'll share more in the future.
Yeah, no, that's good. I like that. There's loads to unpack there in a way, isn't there?
Yeah, it's just every time they randomly appear in my head, I think. But it's kind of like in the moments where, like, if I'm having a shower or something, and like you enter like a trance state, and you're kind of just thinking about things, and I think, oh, that could be an interesting one. Write it down.
Yes. No, I like it. It's a good way. And it's a good thing to have a measure in your life, especially, well, for most people, I think, the term off the rails, I suppose, you feel like you are, and it's quite common to do that. And sometimes you need to go off the rails to sort of figure out whether there is a new track down that direction or not.
Exactly.
But it's good to have some rules to, like you say, both feet, 1 foot on the ground is exactly that.
I wonder if there's also like a correlation between creative personalities and like emotional sensitivity, because I find that I'm relatively stable right? I don't like think I've got like bipolar or anything, but when you're kind of like, you're listening to different kinds of music, exploring different types of artwork, speaking to different types of people, I tend to like go in and out of like having crushes on people like quite quickly as well. And you're kind of just like exploring all this space. And as you're doing that, sometimes it's difficult to maybe give yourself consistent behavior, whether that's like in your work or how you talk to people or all of that. And so when you're kind of looking at yourself at different points in that timeline, you're thinking, I don't know if I recognize that person today, or I don't know if I recognize that person today. So again, like the policies are just kind of like, oh, maybe when I feel like I shouldn't say this or make this thing, you go, oh, okay, well, the policies kind of say to do this instead, so it's a stabilization technique, I guess I'd call it.
No, I like it. I probably need more of that in my life, actually. But I suppose everybody needs it in a way, don't we? Because it's very easy to go in the wrong direction, or to have balance and focus. I suppose that's not that I want to bring religion into it, but that's why lots of people have that sort of religious.
That is true though, because when you think about the 10 Commandments, these are like my 10 Commandments. When you think about it, it's just like a grounding technique. Interesting parallels.
It is.
that is something I do say to people. I'm not religious, but I do consider myself spiritual, and it's not like in the traditional way. It's not like I don't know if I believe in ghosts or anything. I don't really know if I believe in angels. I believe that maybe something created the universe, but I don't think that's the point. I think spirituality for me is being open to the feeling of life. I think a term I like is stop and hear the music. And it's like, it's something that, you can't objectively measure it. It's that sometimes you just get a feeling when you're at a place, or maybe the feeling is from someone. I think like love is an important part of that. It's that's where I consider myself spiritual. It's like, okay, you don't have to believe anything. You just, if you're open to experiencing life, then I think that's important.
That's very similar to, I think, is it Buddhism that has right awareness? So when you're doing something, it's more about the way you're thinking about it. That's important, not the thing you're doing. Hope I haven't sort of butchered it. There's probably Buddhists out there. What is this rubbish?
I should probably learn more about that. Yeah.
But it's exactly, it's almost that you can go through anything in life because it's your mental state that's depicting how you feel about it, not the external things that are happening to you. That's how I understand it anyway.
That's exactly it. I think that if you're coming from like a really logical, rational side of life, which I think a lot of programmers do, which is kind of ironically why I don't really get on with a lot of programmer personalities. You try and see everything through this rational lens, but sometimes there are just some moments in life where you stop and something hits you, and it just be like, maybe it's a message from elsewhere, and it's just like, manipulating whatever. And I just like to think that, okay, there's an objective part of my mind going, your brain's been hit with a wave of hormones. But then there's another part of my mind going, okay, well, there's an alien somewhere kind of injecting like some emotion into your head. And I'm like, well, let's be in a superposition state where we can believe any of these things and just enjoy the experience. So
that's an interesting point of view. Yeah, I like that. It's very true.
So
yeah. I know what you mean. Yeah, it's funny because it's an interesting community that we have, isn't it? Where sort of like the Blender community is a classic example where you've got artistic people and program, and they're very logical versus creative. I don't know whether they are really on the other ends of the spectrum or anything, but there's just a difference, and it's. I think the Blender community does really well at getting it all to work. Because there's very little toxicity, I find. There is obviously going to find pockets, and as Blender grows in popularity as a program, you get more of those people you don't necessarily want in there stirring things up. But I'm amazed at how positive the community always is. I don't know how you see it in your YouTube comments and things like that, but generally there's a huge amount of positivity, and it's a really nice place to be.
Yeah, overall it's extremely impressive how positive it is and how generous it is.
Yes.
I found that one thing I always said was, in terms of hate comments, so I'm going to start that again because start by me. One thing I've always found is that in terms of hate comments, there were more of them when the channel was small, and there became less of them when the channel grew. And for me anyway, it's probably not true for everyone else, but I haven't entirely been sure why. I felt like it was probably because when someone's smaller, it's easier to feel confident in criticizing them. And when someone's larger, you see like this entire net, like that they've built, and it becomes like harder to criticize. But I'm not too sure.
Yeah.
So I've kind of been like assessing the behavior of like the wider YouTube community, the more internal community of Blender, the kind of people that go to the conferences. Again, yeah, as you say, like really supportive. I think the reason for that is because the skill sets benefit each other really well, as well as the personalities. Like the developers are making tools for the artists to use. The artists give a lot of information to the developers of how it's used, and this kind of helps everyone keep their job, basically.
Yeah.
So it's an extremely beneficial community for all these, for like the widest spectrum of personalities. Whereas in other industries, like if you're doing industrial work or whatever, it's like, well, where's the room for creatives, like in some of that? So
I guess because Blender, and it's an amazing model that it's open source, you do get that sort of element that everybody's supporting each other more. I don't know whether the Maya or 3D Studio Max community has that same qualities that the Blender community does. And there does seem to be a genuine, I want to help people with this. I think Blender's just the most amazing thing, that it's this really, probably one of the most powerful programs that you can get almost, isn't it? Going off on one there, but it's free, and people can go in and change the code, and you can have it. And you think, what? This is crazy. And I've always look at that and think that's how life should be. That should be a sort of society should look at that and mimic that as much as we can.
This is actually kind of making me think about the AI stuff again, because we're thinking about like human interaction. But so Blender compared to Autodesk products, one of the reasons is not, I think maybe not just because it's free, but because it's made itself an anchor for the community. Like at the very core of Blender, it's all about, this is free for anyone to use. We want you to use this for anything, like within the reasons of GPL and whatever. But it's kind of other people can rely on that anchor. They kind of grow around each other. But for like Maya, for example, there may still be creators making free resources for people, but they have to become their own anchor because they can't rely on Maya or Autodesk. And then if that dissipates, then it's just gone, So it's hard for people to kind of like keep something solid growing there in terms of a community. But Blender has this anchor. People can come and go and they grow on top of it, So it's just easy for these perception frames to meld. So what I mean is like, so I have my community. We'll call that a perception frame. We all have our own like experiences, feelings, whatever. So, and then we meld with the Blender community,
Indeed.
like in moments like the conference, and then kind of move in and out, and it grows and shrinks. But it's just because that anchor's there, it's like, it can exist. But then you think about other open source software, and there are many other open source softwares which don't have the community. And like the question is why? True. I think it's because for a lot of them, it just doesn't cover as much ground in terms of like the creative technical aspect, whereas Blender does. Blender like ties into what a lot of people want to make. We're talking about like the films and games, emotional experiences, etc. It's very difficult for something like Audacity or Inkscape to cover the same emotional ground. But I think this is again why human connection is important with AI tools, because we're worried about AI taking over everything, even if it's taking over the development space. But if you just look at human behavior in general, I think it's all about community and connection. And people really want something they can connect with emotionally. So anything which can create that anchor is, I think, a ship in the storm, should we say, that will survive. Hopefully that made sense. I'm probably just been like a kind of pseudo-religious rant.
Now that makes a lot of sense, actually. I can see that. I was thinking like the Critter community or Godot community. They're still, they still do well, but it's almost so much smaller, isn't it? Because Blender is so far-reaching in terms of the software and its uses and stuff. I'm sure that if they could, they'd go further, with the software.
I think a smart way to do things is to kind of have these software communities meld together. And people try and do that. In fact, I suppose Epic's actually kind of trying to do that with the way that they're kind of buying up and granting all this software to try and make sure that it persists.
It's interesting.
And,
Yeah.
Bridges between softwares as well. NVIDIA's doing that quite a lot. So you're seeing examples of that desire for connection even through like the industry, which is interesting.
Yeah, I feel like Blender without Blender, we wouldn't have that. That's what I feel like. Because Blender, so many people were jumping across to Blender because it was free. And it's really hard to access the 3D community, wasn't it, back the 3D workspace. So try and get a career in it, because you'd have to buy this really expensive program, Maya or Max and stuff. And then Blender was there. It wasn't great to start with. It was very tough. So most people still had to go across to Maya or Max if they wanted any hope of being in the industry. But Blender suddenly went, right, let's make ourselves more industry standard. And then the others had to adapt because they were losing space. So we've got to be a bit more community based, and we've got to give away some things. And I feel like Blender started that off because it forced them to say, look, if you don't do it, we're going to take all your audience. So well done to Blender for forcing people to be caring.
I feel like that's, again, like you can identify patterns in the world. And I feel like some patterns are consistent. We were talking about like AI tools making things more accessible to artists. I think Blender is an example of that pattern that's already happened. So if you look, they say that the past tells you a lot about the future. So I feel like something similar happens there. Blender is this kind of disruptive free thing, which kind of disturbs the status quo and makes things more accessible, and then they have to adapt. And maybe that's going to happen here again. If we're talking about like animation tools, for example, okay, maybe it's difficult now. Here's a disruptive technology. Things have to adapt, move on, etc. But ultimately, we just hope that, again, at the end of the day, quality of life is preserved and people can still have jobs. But
because it's in everybody's interest for everybody to be happy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if there's too much like crunch or oppression, it's just, what do you end up with? Like if there's a lot of exploitation, it's not sustainable. No. It's like a farm. You can't raise, as in like burn the farm, and kind of like, pull everything out for maximum, tend to the garden. That's another policy.
Is it?
Yeah, it is. Good. See, I'm pretty good at remembering them. Tend to the garden means don't do everything for money. It means if you want things to survive in the long term, you have to take care of your environment, which means other creators, which means like sharing other creators. And I learned this from you because you shared my channel at the very beginning, which is why I have a job. if people didn't realize, I have mentioned it before. I put out my first tutorial series. You did a video when you were on about 40,000 subs talking about where to find inspiration. You took a look at Blended Nation. I was on there, right space, right place, right time. And then that gave me some subs. So that was like the Kickstart. Anyway, that's an example of tending to the garden. So now here we are. You've got to look after other people, make sure everything's growing healthily, and then you will be looked after in the long term. You'll be able to, you'll be fed.
We rely on the people around us, don't we?
Exactly.
In order to survive. You can't survive on your own.
Yeah. Oh, we have just been going for about an hour, so we're going to start kind of closing it up. Is there anything else you really want to talk about on the podcast, or like anything you want to pick my brain on before we go?
Not particularly at this second, but I bet there's you stop these things and you think, no, I should have asked this, and so we'll have to book in another one for some point.
Yeah, we'll have to do a round two. I like the idea of doing that. Because I look at I was taking some inspiration from other podcast structures because I really like the idea of doing podcasts. They're quite difficult to market, so I feel like I need to do consistency. But it'll be nice to get people back for other rounds to kind of develop more on the subjects and kind of see where it goes. So again, for people that haven't seen your work before, where can we point them to kind of learn more?
My YouTube channel is kind of, I suppose I do have a website, but my YouTube channel is kind of everything's on there, the stuff I do. And generally speaking, that is me, I suppose.
So check out the YouTube channel. You'll learn all you need to know. And
exactly. Yeah.
Is there like what kind of direction do you feel like you're going in for the next year of your content?
That's a good question. I suppose I'm always trying to discover new things and then break them down into their simplest form for a beginner to understand. So animation is what I'm looking more at recently. So I'll probably start looking into some basic how to get into animation, and because we've got some real experts in the community who do such brilliant jobs at animation, but it's still hard for that person who doesn't know what they don't know to try and access that space. So I'm probably for that person there, that go-between between the expert and the beginner, like you were saying exactly earlier. So I'll keep exploring new things, new developments, and try and be that person to sort of say, oh, this is interesting, this is how you start it off, sort of thing.
Yeah,
that's where I am, and that's where I'll be heading, I think.
Fantastic. Well said as well. So we do something on my videos where I ask people to put an emoji in the comments if they reach the end. It's kind of like a way of connecting, and people basically like signing, hey, I made it to the end. Do you have any emojis you like? It's probably a weird question. There are so many emojis to pick from, but for the last couple of podcast episodes, I've been giving the person an opportunity to pick it. But if you can't think of anything, don't worry, I'll think of something.
I like that. If only I could think of a particular emoji. Or maybe I can just
pick something completely random.
Yeah. It's if you can find a dinosaur emoji or something. Just for the sake of something
there are dinosaur emojis.
Well, there we go.
That'll be it.
It'll have to be a dinosaur emoji.
Yeah, so if you're on YouTube...
I like that as well. I like sometimes if I have one of these sort of rambly sort of videos, I say, oh, thanks if you're staying with me. Give me I'm still with you, Grant. Because it does make you feel good, doesn't it? You think, oh, there's people who have stuck with this all the way through, and you feel like they're a bit closer.
Yeah, exactly. Because on the YouTube analytics, you don't really see how many people made it to the end. You get a percentage and you see a graph, but it doesn't say, oh, like 50 people watched it from 0 to this. So
indeed.
So this is like a really good indication. If you're watching on YouTube, please put a dinosaur emoji in the comments and let us know if you liked any part of this podcast. If you're on Windows, you can access an emoji keyboard by pressing the Windows key and the period key. A lot of people don't know about that, but it brings up this little emoji thing.
Or they could type in dino, I suppose.
Yeah, dino.
If they're struggling, if they can't remember the window and period key.
And the period key, yeah.
It's pretty I'm going to try and remember that.
Yeah.
And I quite like emojis. Because when I communicate, I like expressions. And when you're texting, you can't. So I overuse emojis, and I think that's probably, I don't know, bad form or something, but I can't help but have smiley faces after everything. Because that's just who I am.
No, I do too. I think it's actually quite an important part of human language now, because it's very hard to like indicate tone. Yeah.
Indeed, yeah.
So anyway, thank you for coming on the podcast, Grant. This was great. We'll have to do another round sometime. And
definitely.
Goodbye,
thank you very
everyone.
much for having me. Yep.